Angie. Welcome to the Nifty Travel Podcast.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, well, you're most welcome. And one of the first things I always ask my guests is what about your first memories of travel?
Well, this might surprise a few people, but I sound very American. Obviously, I am. But my first memories of travel were in England. My mother is from England. She was born in Chelmsford. She met an American military man. They married, moved to the United States, had me, and then we moved back to England when I was only 2 years old. So my first memories of travel are probably in the area around Cornwall. I remember a castle, and I really remember thinking that it belonged to King Arthur. I have no idea what the name of the place is, but I just remember walking amongst the walls and feeling like I was in a fairy tale.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Well, that's a one.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've always been a traveler. I don't remember not traveling. And part of that comes from a military lifestyle. Growing up as a military brat, I also married a man in the military who was a U.S. Air Force officer. So I literally traveled my entire life because the military was sending us places, and we would show up. And my parents were always very good about getting to know the area and taking us places. And then of course there were always trips back home to visit people. For my dad, that meant Wisconsin. We would often take a road trip if we were in the United States to go back up. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford to go to England very often, but my English grandparents would come visit us wherever we were at, and then we'd vacation there. So that was always a pleasure for me as well. But travel's just always been there for me.
So, well, I can't ask what it was like going in place X in the US because obviously you must have been um, traveling a lot. So, what was it like being on the road then, I suppose, going to America?
Living in many different places in the United States, I think really informed who I am today because I've gotten to live. I mean, it's no secret right now. The United States is a very divided place. We see a lot of the way we talk about things is very black and white. But when you go live in communities and go live in different states, it's not as black and white as it seems. There's people who everywhere who believe in doing good still and in um, oh, this is hard to talk about. I don't want to talk about politics, but I also living in so many different places, it's hard. We lived in the South, in Alabama for a year. That was probably the place that I learned the most about division. I realized that racism is still very much alive and well. It was a really difficult place to live in. We were told not to go to the local Thanksgiving Day parade, for example. And we asked why. And they said, well, that's because it's for the Black people. And that's their parade. And it's like, what are you talking about? There are still places in the United States where segregation, though not official, is still practiced. And that was surprising to me. But then we've lived in other places in the United States where it those divisions don't seem as rampant. We actually chose to move to Portland, Oregon, intentionally, partly because of my husband's family connections. His family originally came from Oregon, even though they transplanted themselves to California. But also because it's a city that invites new people very easily. And we wanted a place where we felt like we could belong. And we've certainly found it. We love getting to know our new state of Oregon. We're actually writing articles now for our website about living in the state of Oregon, camping here, going and building a chocolate bar downtown. Um, Things that connect us really well with the local area, and it's been wonderful for us. So yeah, moving around, I'm having to learn how to live staying in one place, and that's a process of itself. This is the longest I've lived in any one place now, uh, in my whole life. We're here for 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, well, I think the first place I lived more or less the same place for about 50 years. Um, but, if you like a place, time just has no meaning. It just it happens, doesn't it?
Well, in some ways, I'm jealous. I've loved my life, but there are times when I wish I had lived in a place for 50 years. That I would know the community in ways that were just deeper, and um, yeah, there's no right way or wrong way to live your life, right? But we always sometimes wish we could have other people's experiences. Maybe that's why we keep traveling, to live in other people's shoes for a little bit of time.
Yeah, I think that's right, actually. I mean, I grew up in, sort of a sole child. I was the only child. My father was the only child, but my cousins were they were the complete opposite. So,
Yeah,
in a way, I got a bit of both worlds.
yeah,
So, I imagine as uh, moving around America, as you have alluded to, you've seen many facets of it. I mean,
I have.
uh, other Americans I've spoken to, have described, immense diversity and uh, various, each state is a country in its own right. Has that been, is that your experience too?
Um, each state is has its own personality. I don't think each state is a country in its own right. We have some states that are larger than life. They're very well known through film, through their large economies, their impact. California, Texas, Alaska. Sometimes I think the people living there feel like they're in their own country, and understandably so. But there are connecting pieces throughout the United States: our Constitution, our freedom of speech, our democracy. Um, you can see McDonald's everywhere you go. You're always going to find a Home Depot. There are certain things when you go, you just know you're in the United States no matter which state you're in. I love the parts that set the states apart from each other. Um, the different geographies, the culture, and the food. To be able to go to New Orleans and eat Creole food is an experience that everyone should have the opportunity for. We lived in Louisiana for a few years. It's a wonderful state. Um, we've lived in Washington D.C., where we were walking distance from three of the 50th best restaurants in the United States. Um, we love this part of living in the United States. But we also got to live other places, and that's actually how my business started. My husband was assigned to Quito, Ecuador in 2013 as a military attache to the US Embassy. And it was our second introduction to South America. We'd spent a year in Buenos Aires while he was going to school with the Buenos Aires military. And we got to know what it was like to live in Ecuador and travel in Ecuador as locals.
So going to Ecuador then, was that well, apart from England being a strong connection, was that one of the first countries you visited outside of America?
No, not really, because we'd lived in Germany twice, so we knew Europe very well. When I was a child, I lived in Asia. I lived in the Philippines. Um, and then we had that year in Buenos Aires. So by the time we moved to Ecuador, we'd had a lot of experience living in other places, but we'd never lived in an Andean nation per se. Living in Buenos Aires is like living in this sort of mix between Europe and South America. It's very Italian in a lot of ways. Um, that surprises people. It's very South America, but it's also very European at the same time. When we moved to Quito, Ecuador, there's no pretense that this is a European city. It is a colonial city for sure. And there is definitely a European impact, but it is very much rooted in South America. And the kind of tourism we learned about when we lived in Ecuador was more diverse than when we're in Europe or traveling in the United States. The types of ways to immerse in communities are just very different, and because the communities sometimes don't look anything like our communities in the United States and in Europe. Yeah,
So, so having had all these experiences and living in different countries, would you say that your view of America changed each time you went back?
definitely. It's where the name of our business sort of comes from. So, not your average American. Our kids named our business, and they named it. This was back in 2013 when I started the blog. We were just writing a blog. What should we name the blog? And they remembered living in Europe, and people would walk up to our family and want to know us better, or ask us questions. And one of the first questions would always be, "So, where are you from?" And sometimes it was in German because we spoke enough German to be able to manage, and sometimes it was in English. And we'd ask, "Well, would you want to guess?" And they would never guess the United States. We would have the gamut of, depending on where the person was from, England, Canada, Australia are all pretty obvious choices, because we spoke English. But we'd also get really weird ones like Brazil or Russia. And nobody ever guessed the United States. And we began to realize it was partly because we were speaking the local language as best as we could. We were doing our best to dress in a way that didn't look American, and then to behave in ways that generally is seen as stereotypically American, which sometimes is loud or brash or rude, which I don't believe all Americans are, but that's the stereotype of an American traveler. And so we started off the website with that idea. And then we moved to Buenos Aires. We were learning Spanish, and people would ask us where we were from, and I would say, "Soy americana." I am an American. And I'll never forget the first time someone said, "Yeah, I'm an American too." And they were from Argentina. And I did a double take. I'm like, wait a minute. Oh my goodness. South Americans identify as being American. Of course they do. There's a word in Spanish that means United Statesian. Soy estadounidense. And
Mhm.
that's the word I should have been using, and I wasn't. And then I started to wonder, why aren't we using United Statesian or US American when we speak about where we're from? Why do we say American? Why do we think that the United States owns the term American? And so we write about that. We write about what it means to be American. And today on our website, we share stories not only from the United States, from Ecuador, from Argentina, from Colombia. We're reaching out to people in Chile now to start adding content about Chile. We were talking to someone in the Dominican Republic who wants to write. These are all parts of the Americas, and we want our website to reflect the richness of all of the Americas, North and South.
So I suppose we should start with Argentina. It was interesting that you said that your impression of it was European. I was almost, and when you said Italian, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. The Italians love to live in many places, but I was almost expecting you to say Germanic, because that's what Europeans tend to hear mostly about Argentina.
Right. If you go south in Argentina, or you go towards the mountains in Mendoza in Argentina, I think you're correct. I think you are going to find many German influences. I mean, there are entire villages that are built in the German style. And there's the farming culture that comes from German settlers moving down into Patagonia. But in Buenos Aires itself, the porteños, I think, identify more with Italian roots, sometimes with Spanish roots. They claim to speak the purest Spanish in the world. They believe their Spanish is purer than you can find in Spain. They still use the ancient vos instead of tu, which is the way to say you with family and friends. And this is a very old Castilian type of Spanish that they're very proud to speak. So yeah, I think the European roots are strong in Buenos Aires.
It's interesting what you say about languages. I'm not a Spanish speaker, but I have an Argentinian friend, and we organised a joint sports holiday to, well, we flew to mainland Spain, but we went to a place called Genoa in Catalonia. And so I think I heard 3 versions of Spanish in one week. And he said, "Oh, I can't. There are certain versions of Spanish which are almost unintelligible." And I thought, wow, it's interesting how languages can differ so much. So
Yeah. We were fortunate. We learned Spanish first in Buenos Aires, which is one of the most difficult places to learn. But then I think it made it easier when we moved to Ecuador. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but Spanish, you're right. The dialects can be very complex.
So when did you start getting interested in languages? Was it because you and your parents were moving a lot, or was there another inspiration?
Well, when I was younger, we didn't we lived in the Philippines. I learned a few words of Tagalog, but we did not live in the community. The military there has their own base and their own neighborhoods. So, and I was fourth, fifth grade. So we only learned a spattering of words. In the United States, when you're in high school, most high school students study a language, and I did study Spanish. It was Castilian Spanish from Spain with the vosotros. And we had a fair instructor, but basically, I learned really basic construction. So when I went to university, I studied French. I had this dream always of backpacking through France, and I wanted to learn French so I could go backpack through France, and it was wonderful. But learning a language in a university or a school setting is very different from practicing a language in real life. And so when I moved to Germany with my husband, I joined a class not of US military wives learning German, but of immigrants moving to Germany learning German, which was the smartest thing I ever did because the only common language we had was German, not English. And it forced me to speak. And so I learned German fairly rapidly. I don't speak it today because I speak Spanish fluently. All the Spanish words come into my head when I try to speak German. I understand quite a bit of it still, but it's hard to speak. So yeah, I've always loved languages, but I don't think I'm blessed with that kind of brain that can maintain multiple languages in my head at the same time. Supposedly, that starts at a very young age. I am a good mimic of accents. And I think that plays into it. And I think that comes from having a mother from England and a father from the United States. And living in so many different states in the United States, I adapted a regional accent as a kid in each location. I can remember moving from Louisiana to California and being teased horribly about my Southern accent. Um, in fact, the first time we moved to California, I was 6 years old. I moved from England to California, and they had to put me in speech therapy because I was so nervous to speak. I was starting to stutter because I was afraid all my words were coming out as British, and the little California kids like to laugh at that too. So I learned from a young age how to adapt.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, the school playground can be a bit of a mess, can't it? When
it can. Kids are often unkind. I don't know how intentional it's like, I'm going to be mean to this person today. And sometimes when we're kids, we don't see the joke that might be behind the comment. I was a very sensitive child, and I think that I wanted to belong so badly that there were probably moments I could have laughed some things off, and I just wasn't able to do it. But as an adult, fortunately, I'm able to look back on those times and they were learning experiences. They made me a resilient person, and that's informed my business today.
yes, well, adapting and being resilient, it sort of it almost creeps up on you, doesn't it? I mean,
It, It
I could
does.
think of, situations here and there, but maybe it happens all the time without us realizing.
There's probably some truth to that. There's always everything going on. I think one thing I've learned in my life is that it's important to be intentional, and so sometimes to look at those situations and intentionally understand their impact. I believe a lot in intentional travel, that when we're planning a vacation, we do so understanding why we're wanting to go and our reasons for travel, because we can engage with the local community or with our hosts in a more natural and honest way when we're understanding why we're going in the first place.
Mm. So your love of languages wasn't just restricted to um, other languages other than your natural tongue. You were also very interested in the English language, and so you pursued that. So I was just wondering whether that sort of led to your wanting to use the language to.
Well, I think, yeah, to write. I turned to writing as a way to communicate with the world, I guess. I felt I started writing pretty heavily when we lived in Argentina. I was not writing my own blog. I wish I would have had the sense to start my own blog at that point in time. I was writing on a website called Daily Kos, which is generally for political content, but they had all these little sub communities. And there was a bird watching community and a travel community. And so I started writing about the things we were doing as we were traveling in South America. And that content that I was writing was more popular or very popular on this political platform than some of the stuff I was writing politically. And it made me realize that there was an audience for what I was writing. It made me more comfortable in becoming a freelance writer. I started writing content for military family magazines, for kids magazines on travel. I never was able really to break into the travel writing market. I would pitch articles and never really found the right place. And so I'm like, I stopped pitching and I just started putting all the content on our own website. And it has been a really good thing that I did so, because all that content has made a vibrant website. We've got over 400 articles in English. 150 of those are translated to Spanish now. We're working on getting the entire website translated into a fluent Spanish, so that we can attract a South American audience to our content as well. Because a lot of what we're writing about is important to South Americans, especially when we're starting to look at a world where we're encouraging people to travel near home. And I hope we get a chance to talk about that a little bit today in this hour, this idea of what sustainability means in international travel. But traveling near home is a first step to understanding how to be a better traveler, how to invite people who live near you into your life and to be a part of their lives, and to support local tourism in your own neighborhood, I think is super important.
Yes, well, kind of related to that is if you get the bug and become a regular traveler, do you think one of the results of that is actually you don't visit your own place as much as you do other places?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, and I am unsure. I don't know what the answer to that is. I think it probably depends. It's different for everybody. But if you only have a particular budget for travel and you spend it to go overseas, that does imply that you have less money to participate in your own country's tourism opportunities. It's a little ironic because in the United States we're such a big country. I can travel to another state and it feels like visiting a different place. Differently, yeah. Boy, you asked a tough question.
Well, I only asked because I said, a couple of my guests have said, oh, well, those in particular who've lived abroad and then gone back after a long time,
Yeah.
they were saying, I felt like a visitor in my own country.
Oh, well, that's definitely true. That's the reverse culture shock. And I think reverse culture shock exists big time. I can remember walking into a grocery store after being overseas for 3 years and walking into an American grocery store and being overwhelmed by the amount of choice on the shelf. It's making choices in the United States sometimes is overwhelming. We have so much, and I think that most Americans don't understand uh, how limited those choices can be in other countries. Yeah,
Well, I guess it's a first world problem, isn't it? The
it
more
is.
the more advanced an economy, the more reach, the greater the tentacles reaching out to. Um, I think I remember my parents' reaction to the first ever, um, self-service store. They really didn't know what to make of it
Yeah,
because before then, um, you had to ask for anything and they would go off and get it for you.
yeah.
Self-service was strange, but today it's just like second nature. You go to stores and you don't even have to speak to a person if you don't want to. It's all barcoded.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually a little sad, I think, that it's that way. And I still appreciate going to our locals farmers markets because we're dealing with the people who are growing our food. If I can go to that and buy most of our produce instead of the supermarket, I will. I hope those things, those opportunities never go away. But yeah, people, especially who live in cities that don't push themselves to do. I guess farmers markets, in a way, are sort of tourism when you think about it.
I think
We,
you're very
yeah.
right. Yeah.
When you talk about doing like using your own country for tourism, we can't afford to travel in the United States in the same way we can afford to travel in South America. So yeah, the cost of the flight can be expensive, but when we get to South America, the cost of the food, the cost of the hotels, all of that is much less than it is in the United States. We can stay at an eco lodge that provides us 3 meals a day more affordably than we can camp sometimes in the United States. It's it's really sort of crazy, and so yeah, in some ways, we we do forget to travel here. That we are intentionally planning trips in Oregon to know our state better. We plan on going to this really great bird watching festival that's held every spring down in Southern Oregon. Um, to do so affordably, we're going to rent an Airbnb so we can share with friends. Um, yeah, so we are budgeting, but it is, you have to, I have to budget differently. I have to think differently about travel in the United States than I do travel overseas.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, you learn different styles of traveling, don't you?
definitely. Definitely.
In the way you were saying, describing, oh, well, I try to mimic the people.
Yeah,
Uh, you get to. Do you see different rhythms in different locations?
definitely. Definitely different rhythms in the United States and outside of the United States. The city of Portland's known for being really weird and laid back. And I think we are. I think that's why I love living in this city. I'm rarely seen without a flannel shirt on nowadays. I don't have to dress differently. And we'll talk. I've got a really good story about different rhythms. When we went to Ecuador as diplomats, I got invited to a tea party with other military spouses, and so you, especially as a Brit, what in your mind sparks tea party? What do you think you're going to do when you go to a tea party?
Well, tea and cucumber sandwiches.
Exactly, tea and cucumber sandwiches, and I wore a nice little suit because I thought, my grandmother would like to see me in this suit. My nan in England would say this is the appropriate thing to wear to a tea party, and I show up at this tea party in my nice little suit with my nice flats, and every woman in the room is in a cocktail dress and high heels. And that was my first clue. Tea parties in South America are not the same as tea parties anywhere else in the world. The rhythm was very different. We were served a light meal. We were offered shots of whiskey at the end. A few people had tea. A lot of people drank coffee. And then when all of this was done, we got up and danced. It was the wildest tea party I've ever been to in my life. And at first, I was embarrassed because I showed up and I looked very different. I didn't understand the rhythm. I wasn't able. I didn't have any other experiences so that I could begin to mimic, to be able to reflect what I was going to. After that, I got a lot better. I didn't wear that little suit to any other tea parties. I began to wear cocktail dresses. I never wore my high heels. I always wore flats. But you do make your best attempt to reflect the people you're with so that everybody feels comfortable. I think at least that's what I learned growing up. As I try to make everyone in the room feel comfortable. Yeah.
So when you write, are you trying to well reflect what you see, what you feel? Because I know you're interested in storytelling as
I am.
well.
I am. So when I was first writing, I was just writing about what I was doing. And I think I wasn't so worried about reflection. And then we started going on some of these trips where they're offered as sustainable tourism or opportunities to meet local communities. And I began to realize that not all tourism models are created equally. We had one particular trip that we went to go visit the Waorani tribe, the Waorani community in Pastaza, Ecuador. They were running a lodge called the Waorani Lodge, and there was a company who um, managed that connection from Quito to there. As U.S. diplomats, we were very limited in where we could travel, and they did work with us to design a trip that we could do without the U.S. Embassy getting upset with us. Um, we arrived in an airplane, had to fly in. We had a guide from Quito who spoke English and Spanish. And then we had a local guide. His name was Bai, and he spoke Spanish and wow. So we were fortunate because we speak Spanish. We were able to talk directly with our local guide. The other couple with us was from Ireland. They didn't speak a word of Spanish. They relied on the Keto guide for all the translation. And that put us in a unique place because we could hear the translations, but we understood what was being said in Spanish. And we began to realize our Keto guide wasn't translating everything our WOW guide was saying. She was cherry picking the information she wanted to share. As the community members, Bai and the other people who were serving us, they, cleaning our rooms, making our food, washing our dishes, became comfortable with my family because we spoke Spanish. They started to ask some very difficult questions. Uh, why do you tip the guide from Keto differently than you tip the community? Why doesn't Bai receive a tip separately for his guiding? Why does he have to share with the community? Why doesn't the guide from Keto share in the community tip? How much money did you spend on your trip? Do you understand how much money our community gets versus how much money the travel agency gets? Oh my goodness. Why do people come here and take pictures of our children without our permission? I was in tears. I thought I had specifically done all of the homework to choose a trip that was well designed, that my family could afford, and that the community would benefit from our visit, only to find out that the travel agency really hadn't done the work necessary with the community to make sure they were open to tourists like ourselves and that they were understanding how money was being made, how money was being shared, how money was being spent. How much did it cost to get us out there? I mean, but none of this was apparent to the community members. And it made me realize that I needed to start writing about tourism differently. And so I started writing about unfair tourism, and I started really trying to promote those places that I felt visitors should go visit. And those are ones owned by the local community or owned by local Ecuadorians. And to book directly as you can, because unfortunately, not all travel agencies are created equal. Now, I'm trying to develop relationships with travel agencies in Ecuador specifically so that we can often assist people in not having to design every part of their own tour. It's part of our services is we will help people with that, but our main goal is to make information available so that the tourists can make an educated decision on what they want to do. Um, and to avoid falling into what we fell into by a mistake, because there's nothing worse than feeling on vacation that you being there is actually hurting more than it's helping.
Yeah, it must have been quite shocking. And have you found that so different practices are widespread?
Yes, there are many other community tourism opportunities in Ecuador that are designed by the communities, that are run by the communities, and are not travel agency led. And this is what I mean. Sometimes a travel agency goes into a community and says, "This is what we want you to do." Instead of going into a community and saying, "We want to have a conversation with you. We'd like to know what tourism looks like for your community. How do you want to invite tourists in? What level of entrance do you want them to have? Are they allowed to participate in rituals? Are they allowed to go visit the sacred waterfall? Are they allowed to?" These are conversations that have to take place before any tourist shows up on the ground. And when communities have done this together and done this work, the tourism opportunities are much better and more vibrant. And it means sometimes you'll go visit a community. We went to go visit the um, uh, sorry, Randy Borman. He's the child of missionaries, but he was born into a community in the Cuyabeno, um, and they offer tourism opportunities, but do not, um, they don't do a cultural element per se. You get to taste their food, but they really focus on wildlife and on immersion in quiet. And there's a international quiet park in the Cuyabeno Wildlife Reserve. And so you're not going to show up and have people dance for you. You're not going to show up and necessarily see anyone in native costume. And that's okay. I don't need that if that's what the community wants. If that's how they want to invite me in, then they should have that choice. There are other projects we've gone to visit. We just finished a trip in Peru where the community tourism is really very well designed. They've been working with an organization out of Japan that creates eco museums, working with the community to design tourism opportunities that the community designs themselves and then invites tourists in. And we had some of the most beautiful moments. I remember going up to harvest corn. It's the season of the corn harvest. So we went to harvest corn with the community. We did put on some of the local dress to go harvest with them and pick the corn. And then we were invited back into the community dining room and shared a meal that they would typically have after they were done harvesting. It was called a minga. And it's the first time I've ever been invited to participate in a minga, even after living in Ecuador for 3 years. And it was transformational, which sounds almost pat, but it's a memory that's going to stick with me for a lifetime. That this community invited me in a way that said, "Here, do what we do every day, and enjoy yourself while you're doing it because we enjoy what we're doing and we want to share that enjoyment with you." It was absolutely amazing. And I wish more companies, we went with Nuevo Caminos Travel, which is out of Spain, but the owner is from this part of Peru. And so she has designed intentionally and worked with these communities. And it's absolutely, it was an amazing experience. Yeah. So, yeah, I see all kinds of different models, and I know what should be replicated and probably what should not.
So I suppose that the next question is, you know, how many communities are out there? Because there's obviously a lot of, there are a lot of ethnic groups.
There
Uh,
are.
Communities have uh, various, histories. Um, they're obviously the bound. What's interesting, of course, is the modern boundaries don't necessarily represent the boundaries, the communities, because so many used to be, well, nomadic, weren't we?
Yes.
It's not just an Americana thing. It's not an African or European. We were all um, nomadic and had closer relationships with the land and so on.
Well, that's actually an interesting thing to say. We were talking about Randy Borman and the Kofan in the Cuyabeno Wildlife Reserve. Um, the Cuyabeno Wildlife Reserve, that territory was an area where they may have roamed for millennia, but they did not live there. They were transplanted or they chose to move there in order to escape the colonial activities taking place near their more traditional lands. And that's still taking place in South America. The Kofan are, they don't use the word tribe in Ecuador. They use nation or they use community. The Kofan nation is divided into many smaller communities, but they cross the border with Colombia and Ecuador. There are others that cross the border between Ecuador and Peru. And there are some international agreements starting to take place to allow tourism to flow more fluidly across these borders in these places. But it's a very complicated story on how to visit and how not to visit. First of all, you need an invitation. So you can't just show up on the local boat, which there is. There's a boat. It's like catching the bus from Quito out to Tenna or catching the bus from um, London to Yorkshire. You can take a bus or no trains, but the boat is the way you do that, and you can get on a local boat and be dropped off somewhere. But I don't recommend it. I recommend actually making sure communities are inviting you in. And one of the ways to do that is to make connections with locals who know the area. And that's what we do. We can, yeah. I want there to be a database of all of the communities that want to invite tourists in. I want there to be this website that does this. And unfortunately, right now, it's all broken up. You have to belong to an organization in order to get your information out there. And especially when you have a language barrier, if you don't speak English naturally, natively, you're raised speaking wow or IE, which is the language of the Kofan. You learn Spanish as your second language. Then you're expected to learn a third language, English, to be able to communicate with tourists. Managing the platforms that rely on the English language is a barrier to success. So these are things we'd love to find solutions for in the long haul. I think that's part of the reason why we do bilingual content, because people can write to us in Spanish. They can write articles about what they're doing in Spanish. We publish it in that language, and then we translate to English.
Well, the challenge you're emphasizing is, well, it's the clash, isn't it, between ancient and modern. In ancient times, if there was danger, you know, the chief would decide whether it was appropriate to fight or flee. But the modern world is getting so large, and it's more than interruption, it's encroachment to a certain degree. Habitats and many things are being affected.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the encroachment. It's in the news in the Amazon all the time. Amazon is being lost to farming. People, especially in Brazil, forests are being cut down at an alarming rate. As sustainable tourism, responsible tourism proponents, a lot of what I'm hearing in the world is it's more sustainable to travel close to home. And they're not wrong. However, if international tourism goes away in South America, we're going to lose more forests. We need to be visiting communities that are protecting their forests and offering tourism opportunities to enjoy them. Because if we're not, and they're not making money off of tourism, then they are left with two options: mineral extraction and farming. And that's it. And so, unless we find other ways to protect the forest, right now, sustainable tourism is probably the best way to keep these forests and to reforest those places that have already been denuded. The forests grow back at a remarkable rate in the Amazon. So, reforestation programs, I'm not always a fan of, but in the Amazon, I'm a super fan of because you can make a huge difference in just 10 years by planting trees. And there are several projects, Ecuador and Peru, that are doing that.
Well, one of my previous guests, he rode a motorbike across Brazil, and one of the things he was describing to me was how different the climate was between forested and denuded areas.
Yes,
That could be totally comfortable riding through forested or jungle areas, but
yes.
out in the farms, it was unbelievably difficult. So
Yeah.
hot.
It,
So
yeah, well, those trees make a huge difference. There's just an article in the New York Times about coffee plantations. The European Union is doing a wonderful thing, in my opinion. They're trying to now get coffee marked as whether or not it comes from a recently deforested plantation. They want to stop deforestation. We don't need more coffee plantations. We need to grow coffee more sustainably in the places that are already growing coffee. But the problem is the people who are wanting to make new plantations very often are farmers looking to make money in the coffee world, and they don't own the land that's already been deforested. They own land that has forest on it. What are they to do? Is there a sustainable way for them to make money off of coffee and protect the forest? And those are some of the projects we love to support and talk about. There's a community in Sumaco, Ecuador, that was working with about 49 farmers that have 39-hectare plots, and they have an agreement with them to protect. Um, so 39 hectares, 37 hectares of primary forest, and use 2 hectares for farming, and farming in a polyculture manner so that they're creating produce that they can use for their family. They're creating some products to sell at local market, pineapple, peanuts, things that will sell very well locally, and then some for the international market, cacao and coffee. Um, Acai is now being talked about. That famous berry you put in the smoothies that's grown in Brazil. They're starting to experiment with that in Ecuador. So there are solutions, but it's keeping that forest and then planting it in ways that farmers can still make money but still protect the forest. Can we do that? Because your friend is right. When you just cut it all down, it completely changes the local ecosystem, and then that has impacts on the broader ecosystem. There's more drought in the Amazon now than there was 10 years ago, easily.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a complicated story for sure. But of course, communities contain a lot more than the lifestyle that they want to lead. They have a culture and a way of life
Yes.
to that they believe in, and of course there's this constant pressure of I was reading a story only this week on BBC News Channel about a remote community in Brazil you know, so remote they hardly ever come into contact with, the outside world. But even they, it would appear, are concerned that their youngest members, may not stay with them indefinitely. Because as soon as they see that there's perhaps an alternative way of life, it's only young people are curious, aren't they? The ones that have never seen anything else.
Yeah, and whose place is it to put limits or on communities? Communities, these are very difficult conversations to have. I believe that a lot of these young people have rights, and if they want to learn what's outside of their community, they should be able to do so. But at the same time, that education does come at a cost, and how we educate. If their first impact is through a cell phone, scrolling and finding only the information that shows up in an Instagram feed instead of in maybe a classroom setting that is able to talk about the wide variety of information available to us when we know how to search it out instead of just what gets put in front of us. Those are very complex and difficult conversations to have. And yes, this is happening in Ecuador as well as in Brazil. I believe also in Peru. There are communities that are considered no contact communities and have asked for there to remain no contact. Generally, they're in contact with one of the communities that has decided to accept contact. So there's some cross communication taking place. Um, it is getting harder and harder to keep those communities protected, despite them wanting to keep that protection. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know what the right answers are.
But another aspect which is interesting, of course, is that the first world countries think they're so advanced and know a lot of stuff, but actually there's a lot of evidence that communities know a lot more than we do.
Oh,
Uh,
definitely.
how to
Yeah.
live, how to medicate themselves. Have you seen efforts to learn and record the things they know? Because there must be a lot of um,
Not as much as I would like to see. I think that there's definitely more room for that. That's anthropological work taking place. With the COFUN, there is an anthropologist out of the United States, Michael Sapek, who's worked with the community for a very long time, who's trying to help them protect their culture. And it comes also at a great cost. In order to fundraise to protect a community, you need to storytell and you need to share, and not everyone in the community wants to share their story. There's ethical obligations for us as consumers of stories. Uh, Sometimes I think we need to be happy not to understand the community or the stories and still support them in what they do. It's fundraising. I have helped with a few fundraisers in Ecuador, and whenever you're asking people for money to help protect land, people, there is this idea that that donation comes with an obligation to share more than a community may be willing to share. Um, I
yeah,
advise people on how to run fundraisers, and it's sometimes heartbreaking because I have encountered people that don't want to share their story, but they need funds so badly that there's really no other alternative. It's either you fundraise with a story or you don't fundraise.
yeah, it's tricky. I guess the angle I was thinking about, is that there's wisdom, isn't there?
Definitely. Yeah.
And another aspect that I've noticed, well, I very early on in my podcasting, I got to meet a gentleman. We didn't record it, unfortunately, but uh, he was he ran. hiking tours across Colombia to discover lost civilizations, which he was describing as, they're not very accessible, quite difficult to go and see. And I think, well, there are communities and civilizations, that have disappeared from the landscape. I mean, there are plenty of examples of many
Right.
and continents, aren't there? Some we've just discovered, and some we are yet to discover. I mean, I spoke to a gentleman in Ethiopia, for instance, who's, saying, we know about these communities from 7, 8, 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
They've left what they've built behind. They've even built great monuments, and we still have no, they've got their writings and their stories on there, but nobody knows how to, I was going to say how to translate what they were talking about.
Well, we're still learning, I think, about ancient communities, but I think the language we have to talk about it is also problematic. We're talking about exploring and discovering, and for some of these communities, yes, they've been missing from any conversation for thousands and thousands of years, and so there's a lot to learn. But many of these communities are still more modern, and there's no discovering. They have existed, and they know. There's no exploring. They know. They know their land. They know their culture. It's us coming in, um, which is the conversation we're having. If we're invited in, it's okay. If we're not invited in, we have to be happy to accept that and understand that maybe we don't belong everywhere. But this idea of not reinventing, of learning something new about ancient cultures is super important to me. We got to visit an archaeological site in Ecuador called La Florida that is up in the east slope of the Amazon, near a town called Palanda. The reason Palanda is famous is for a bird. They discovered a type of ant pitta there that we went to go see. But right next door is this archaeological site, and we went to go visit, and we learned that it's the birthplace of chocolate. It is the oldest source of domesticated cacao found in pottery in this village. Yet when you go read the history of chocolate online, even ChatGPT, I've tested this out, they talk about the Mayans and the Aztecs in Mexico thousands of years later. I'm trying to get ChatGPT to understand that the history of chocolate started much earlier. We've written an article ourselves. There are scientific papers that show that this is the case, but getting us to rewrite history is incredibly hard. We Western thought really loves the fact that we know. We don't often want to reconsider and rethink what is fact in our history books, and that's a little scary in some ways. That I don't want to rewrite all history, but we do need to reconsider how our history has been written.
Well, I think you're just highlighting that, there have been many characters in many countries who have attempted to rewrite history,
Yeah.
usually in favor of themselves.
Exactly, which is a constant battle. It's always taking place. So rewriting history in a way that honors what actually happened is different than rewriting history by erasing what has taken place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely.
So when it comes to responsible and sustainable tourism, by the very fact that we're using those words, we are firstly recognizing that we cannot dislodge tourism entirely from the process because of the things you've been saying. Communities require some kind of support even when they don't. I guess the real crux of the matter is can we, is it possible to find a fair and equitable um, middle ground? And have you seen any good examples where this happens?
Definitely. Yeah, you go to communities that are inviting you in, that have vibrant programs or that are just starting off. If you want one that is very well established, it's very well known by National Geographic. They send a lot of their tours there. It's the Napa Wildlife Center, located in the Yasuni National Park. It's run by the Anyangu Quechua community. They're Amazonian Quechua. They're they manage everything. They started off with a nonprofit, and the nonprofit managed the business for about 10 years before handing everything over to the community to manage. And now it's a 100% community run and operated organization. Um, they're one of the more well known ones. Sani Lodge is a neighbor of theirs. They're also run by a different community, Quechua community, but they're run by Quechua, indigenous community. In the Cuyabeno Wildlife Reserve, you can always visit the Kofan, but there's another young man who's a Quechua man who runs the Cuyabeno Quechua Lodge. It's a form of community tourism. It's very small. It's mainly his family, but when they have a lot of visitors, he's able to hire more people. Uh, I mean, I could just keep naming off these tiny small ones as well. A lot of this information's on our website. We're still writing more articles all the time, but to find these places, I think you need to understand how to search online. This is one of the things we're looking forward to in the next year in 2026. We want to work with people who want to travel better, and we want to help them learn how to plan their trips in a way that um, puts more money in the local community, and the tips and tricks to be able to do that. To be able to go online and search Indigenous owned tourism project, Indigenous owned eco lodge. Um, why aren't we searching that way? Right? So maybe you'll find something that might be surprising. So when we work with clients in Ecuador and we help them design a website, our main target audience is attracting a US client. That's what I know best. But attracting a US client in the English language also means attracting a certain amount of European audience as well, Canadian as well. And so it's sort of more bang for your buck. If you only have a certain amount of budget to spend, it's a really great way to think about it. And one of the things we do is you want to attract that aligned client. You want a responsible traveler, a sustainable traveler. So, what are they looking for when they search? And a lot of them don't even think to put in sustainable tourism hotel when they're searching. They just look at the destination. So we, as responsible travelers, need to start searching better to find these places because they're using the words on their websites to be able to connect better with you if you only search for them. So Cuyabeno Quechua Lodge, we made sure that the very first thing in their description is we're indigenous owned. We want people to know that from the get-go because that should be what we're looking for, is to really be supporting locally owned places. And we make sure that when we work with a client that the family, if a family is owning a place, that the pictures are there, that the story of why the family started to conserve a farm and turn it into a bird watching destination is on the website so that it inspires people to go, wow, I want to support this family in what they're doing and not go to the hotel that's owned by the international conglomerate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think sustainable and responsible tourism is scalable?
Yes, I do. I think that sometimes we have too many middlemen. And that's to say, if I'm an American looking to plan a trip, normally I work with a US travel agency, and the US travel agency then works with an Ecuadorian travel agency. And then the Ecuadorian travel agency then works with local providers and sometimes a local travel agency if it's in a particular area. Um, and so there's 3 levels of travel agencies that have taken place before I've been able to plan my trip in southern Ecuador to visit a local community. Where if you went online, you could book that trip with the local community directly, and they'll keep far more money. And this isn't to say that travel agencies don't have their place, but maybe travel agencies need to start looking about how we're going about this. Why are there so many layers? Um, how do we make it better for responsible travelers looking to put more money into local economies? How do we guarantee that money is staying in these local economies? Um, I sound very anti-travel agency. I've always planned my own trips. I've always been an independent traveler and done this on my own. Occasionally, when South America travel was new to us, we would book directly with a South American agency to plan our trip. We never used a US agency. Um, but I think it's because of our comfort with the Spanish language. I don't know, to make it scalable, how many layers we can manage in this. How do we, yeah. And for some of these larger places, some of these what I call international conglomerates that are working, how can they make sure they're investing in the local economy in a way that makes us as responsible and sustainable tourism trust what they're saying and know that what they're doing, we want to support, and then maybe we use them more often. Maybe I'll be compelled to buy from them if I know the money is being used in a proper way.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. One thing I've become increasingly aware of is that there are a lot more protected parks in South America than I thought there were. Is that playing a role in helping this or not?
It's a complicated story. Um, in some countries in South America, the idea of having a national park, it's a national park that a US American would understand to be a national park. It's protected land. But in other countries, not so much, and it can change government to government. In Ecuador, Ecuador is famous for having a constitution that protects the environment. The environment actually is listed in the constitution as having its own rights. However, the mineral extraction taking place in national parks right now is extremely high. And that having a designation as a national park is no protection against inviting oil companies in to come explore and decide whether or not they should be able to extract oil. The Ecuadorian people are in disagreement with their government on this right now, but the government is winning the argument more often than not for mineral extraction. And it it could change when the government changes. It may or may not. We just don't know. So having the protected designation helps, except when government chooses to ignore those designations. We're seeing something similar take place in the United States right now with nationally protected lands. Um, when a federal government decides that they are above the law, they can make choices and put things in place, and the courts move slowly. And they may lose in the court of public opinion over time, but in the short term, they can make devastating damage in a very little amount of time. I think we're seeing the same thing in Brazil right now as well. So
Mm,
yeah, it's. I think I was never a proponent of private reserves. I always thought having the public reserves was the best choice. But in South America, private reserves very much definitely have their place and are very important. And there is a lot of small foundations and small tourism projects that started off as family projects that are now very vibrant reserves. A small one that I'm very fond of is Mashpi Amagusa. It was started by Sergio and his wife Doris. They they helped build Sergio helped build Mashpi Lodge, which is a very famous lodge in Ecuador is one of the most expensive places you can stay, upwards of $500 to $1,000 a night in beautiful, full glass window rooms looking out into the cloud forest. He learned how to guide on their trails and decided that his father's land right outside the property was a perfect place to invite bird watchers who couldn't afford to go into Mashpi Lodge. And so he built a bird watching project to come see birds. And it was so popular, they added a place to camp so people could come camp. That was so popular that they built their first 4 rooms and added a restaurant. So then you could show up, stay the night, eat there, and enjoy the birds and the outdoors. Um, a couple of years ago, they reached out to me and said, Angie, we're going to lose some of the land that has traditionally been ours to manage because it's not owned by us. It's owned by an organization in Riobamba, and they want to sell it, and we can't afford to buy it, even though we've managed it for all these years. So we did a fundraiser to buy that land for them. And that got the attention of the American Bird Conservancy, which gave a $40,000 grant. And we raised through a GoFundMe campaign $40,000 to buy this land. And so now this small family in Ecuador owns a bird reserve that is partly done with a foundation they formed called the Jumbo Mashpi, because that was a requirement of the American Bird Conservancy that they form a foundation. But they now have 8 rooms to stay in. They're in the process of remodeling their kitchen and providing a new birdwatching space with a restaurant that is going to be a glorious space. And it's not just for bird watchers. We go there and we see crystal glass frogs at night. We can hike down to the waterfall. They put in an aerial bicycle that you can get in this tram that you power with your feet, and it goes through the top of the cloud forest. I want to go do it next time at night because I think it would be a really cool place to observe the night stars. This is a magical place that I will return to again and again in my life. And part of it is because the people who run the place love the land so much. They reforested, they took cattle pasture that nowadays you can't even tell a cow was ever there. And they're protecting this native forest that is so important to this part of Ecuador better than I think the national government could.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big job, isn't it? No one can ever be everywhere, can they?
No, they cannot. They cannot. And I want to say we want to trust our governments. But right now we're in a time where I think there's a lot of distrust.
Yeah, it's well, governments and politics. It's always been complicated. It doesn't matter how you cut it. Now, I wanted to sort of go on a slight diversion. So I see that you like hiking and bird watching, and you just described one place where you enjoyed bird watching. I see you take lots of photographs of birds. So does that mean you might call yourself a birder from time to time?
That's an interesting question. I call myself a naturalist who loves birding, because when we go birding, we're also looking for orchids and trees and watching for frogs on the ground and enjoying the rock face of a mountain. We love the whole experience of being outdoors. Birding is sometimes an excuse to get outdoors, and there is a joy in identifying birds. We just had one of the most fun experiences testing a new set of binoculars. I don't know if you saw that on the website. We were talking with some guides in Ecuador, and they were all excited by these binoculars that identify birds for you. So you put them up to your head, and you press a button, and it tells you what the bird is on the other side. And we're like, no, there's no way. These can't be all they're written up to be. They're done by Swarovski. And we wrote to the company and said, hey, we can't afford these, but we'd love to test them out because we have some guides in Ecuador that want to buy them and spend a lot of money on them. And we're unsure whether it's a good investment. And they sent us a pair, and we've been testing them. We got to test them here in Oregon and in Peru. So I guess when you look at all that, maybe we have to call ourselves birders because we do love that part of it. But I think it's just, it's just a way to interact with the outdoors. And birding in South America is so easy. It's the birds are everywhere. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask. It doesn't sound as if you're going to say yes, but I was going to ask you: do you have to be patient to be a birder?
No, well, it depends on where you're at and what kind of bird you're trying to see. So, if you just want to experience hummingbirds, you need zero patience in Ecuador to go see hummingbirds. They have over 125 varieties, species of hummingbirds. Many of the eco lodges have set up feeder systems that the birds come to you while you're sitting there having your breakfast. No patience needed, except when it is flowering time in the forests, and then maybe you see fewer birds at the feeders. But generally, year round, you can see hummingbirds in Ecuador. But if for some reason you wanted to go see the spangled coquette hummingbird, which is a gorgeous little beauty that has a frill and it's a really pretty bird, then you have to have patience. It only shows up at certain places at certain times of the year. It's never guaranteed. You have to understand its habits. Um, so it just depends. But you can see colorful tanagers. You can see toucans that are regular visitors at certain places now. That it is an easier place to develop a bird watching habit if you would like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I share your joy of hummingbirds only because on a week's trip to St. Lucia, they had bright. I don't know what the variety was. I would need those pair of binoculars you were talking about.
Exactly.
It was the brightest blue, reflective blue hummingbird I'd ever seen,
Oh my goodness.
and it was so. I just thought they were so graceful in the sort of the jagged sort of movement. Yet when they were feeding from the flowers, they were perfectly still and perfectly quiet, um,
Wow.
and oblivious to anyone watching them.
Alex, have you been to Ecuador?
No, I haven't. No.
So you have a fellow Brit named Stephen Moss. I don't know if you've heard of him before. He is a writer and he writes a lot about birds and bird watching. And he's been to Ecuador several times. I'd recommend you look out for some of his books. Maybe if you're interested in introduction, I can introduce you to him. He'd be a great person to interview for your next podcast. Um, but he fell in love with Ecuador and returns all the time. I would like to invite you to come to Ecuador. We designed a hummingbird tour for a client out of the United States. He wanted to see as many hummingbirds as he possibly could in 8 days. And he's 80 years old. He was concerned about travel in the Andes. And we put him with an excellent guide who had his own car, so travel would be easy. And he had an absolutely marvelous time. So I'd love to help you see those hummingbirds as well.
Well, the nature is both surprising and attractive. And I suppose my next question is just how accessible are countries like Ecuador? I mean, as,
Extremely. I mean, Ecuador, the airport in Quito, Ecuador, the international airport has won awards year after year for being one of the best airports in South America. So, access, flights, direct flights from Europe, direct flights from the United States, from Houston, Atlanta, Miami. For us in Portland, it's a little more complicated. We have to fly to a hub to get there. So, it tends to be for us a 12-hour to 14-hour day on our travel in and travel out. But even then, it's still worth it to us. Once you're in country, you can rent a car, you can drive. If you're a offensive driver, you're probably going to be happier. If you're a defensive driver, you may want to hire somebody. The the good news is that travel in Ecuador with a guide who owns their own car is still affordable, especially if you travel with a small group of friends. It is a really way to make an affordable vacation. You can also use the local buses. I don't have a problem with that for most people. I don't recommend the buses that go overnight, but the buses that travel in the daytime, I think, are perfectly fine. Overnight buses, there's more accidents, and I would shy away from that. Yeah, it's an accessible country, and Quito is so close. It's such a small country, but there's this huge variety in geography immediately. They actually call themselves the country of four worlds because they have the Amazon, the Andes, the coast, and the Galapagos. And those are four very different worlds that are very easy to visit in a single trip. I don't recommend it. I recommend a Galapagos trip specifically if you really want to go to the Galapagos. We can talk about that on a whole different show about sustainability. But in the mainland, you can easily combine two of those geographic regions in one trip and see an amazing variety of places very easily, all from Quito. And then if you decide to fly down south to Cuenca or fly down south to for community tourism in Saraguro, we have a company down there that does an absolutely excellent job of providing living tourism where you can homestay tourism down at south, which is absolutely wonderful. Yeah, it's super accessible. Same in Peru. We're working with providers in Peru, especially in northern Peru, down in Arequipa, places outside of mass tourism like Machu Picchu, where you can have very wonderful vacations planned that support local communities and provide you with a vacation you'll never forget.
Mm. Well, sounds like it. Well, um, usually about this time in chats, I like to ask people about their favourite places, but I think you've already talked about a few already. So
I have.
um, you obviously think about South America in particular a great deal. Um, I suppose the question I'd like to ask now is, which countries, what's impressing you about South America and in any country in particular, as you get to know it more and more.
You know what I think what impresses me the most, and it's not country specific, because we've now lived in Argentina and Ecuador. We've traveled in Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. Um, and there's something that's common throughout, and that's hospitality. These are some of the kindest people throughout all of these countries that I've ever met in my life, and that they invite you in, and that you become friends. It is an amazing feeling, how quickly, how much they want to share what they have in their lives and how they have in their lives, how they live their lives. Um, I have never encountered that anywhere else we've lived, and we've made really great friends when we lived in Europe. Um, but it took time. And when we go to South America, it feels like we develop relationships with people that last for a very long time with very little introduction. They're just so open.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? What you can achieve when you have conversations with people.
it is. It is. And I will admit, speaking Spanish removes a lot of barriers. So, but many of the places we go, there are at least one or two members of the team that speak English. And they're as curious about you as you are as about them. And so you can have some just really great conversations with people and learn why they're doing what they're doing and how you can help support them and tell your friends about them. And um, yeah, I could go on and on about all the places we love. If you want to see Andean condors in the high Paramo, you can stay at Tambo Condor. It's an hour outside of Quito literally from the airport an hour to their front door, and you're out in this completely different habitat where spectacled bears migrate through a couple of times a year, eating the local cactus. Um, and the Andean condors nest right across from their viewing point. And we've seen upwards of 13 condors flying in the air at a time, which is rare, but we've seen it. It's absolutely amazing. Normally there's 3 or 4 at a time. And on lucky years, there's a nest, an active nest. It's not every year. But yeah, close to one of the national parks where there's this stunning snow covered volcano. Yeah, I could go on and on.
Well, one thing that's important to be a traveler is curiosity, isn't it?
It
And
is.
if you can tell a story that makes someone curious, then hopefully that's enough for them to want to find out more.
Hopefully. Well, all we want to do is trigger that idea that maybe this is the place for you to visit. And so we write in ways that we tell people why we love a place. And then hopefully it'll attract a similar kind of traveler, a responsible traveler to these destinations.
Fantastic. Well, Angie, it's been absolutely fascinating having a chat to you. We could easily go on for a lot longer, and maybe we'll have another chat at another time. Who knows? But
I would appreciate that, Alex. Thank you so much. I'm very glad I met you at Latitude. It was an excellent networking event, happened very quickly, but this follow on has been a treasure. It really, I am very grateful for the time spent with you.
well, and thank you too for your time. Pleasure to chat to you.
Thank you. And thanks to your audience for listening.
Absolutely.